Hey everybody, welcome back to Before the Commit episode. I keep saying Beyond the Commit. Maybe we should call it that. Before the Commit episode 5.
I think that's
This week,
trademarked already.
this week we're going to be talking about Kiro code or Cairo code. We were joking before we need a pronunciation guide for all these tools. We'll also be talking about elevation of privilege with bash tools. And we'll, of course, hit our news or noise segment. We'll probably do it afterwards because we kind of get stuck on that sometimes. We'll talk about emotional distress and some news coming out of OpenAI regarding how people are utilizing platforms like ChatGPT. As usual, I have with me my friend Dustin Hillgartner. What's up, Dustin?
Hello.
Yeah, so when you said you were going to pick this tool this week, I just started thinking about like how the AWS thing kind of came about, and many people may not even know what AWS means. I mean, a lot of our listeners might be technical, but our podcast gets split up by AI post show automatically and gets distributed throughout the week on social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook. And there's a different type of audience there. So sometimes they might see a clip and not know what AWS means. And, so in the early 2000s, Amazon wasn't really what it is right now. I mean, Amazon does so many different things. I mean, I don't know if anybody remembers, but they used to just sell books online. It was a bookstore. And in fact, in college, I used to, buy books on Amazon, used books for courses rather than go to the bookstore and pocket the extra money that my parents would send me and use it for other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, essentially what Amazon did was they built their own data centers. They went and built their own infrastructure. And, like Ford did in the early 20s, they needed fuel to run the assembly line. And so they created a fuel business, a charcoal business called Kingsford. And they wound up selling off the byproduct as a separate business. And obviously many people still use Kingsford charcoal today. So in early 2006 or in 2006, Amazon launched two services, S3 and EC2, which is basically cloud storage and servers or compute for rent. And that's where AWS or Amazon Web Services got it started from. And it really started a revolution. I mean, we didn't really know back then what we know now, which is that, AWS would change how we as developers would, me and you working together in the early 2010s at companies. And, we relied very heavily on IT people to provision infrastructure for us or to release software.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was kind of like the beginning of like, kind of, those people, the gatekeepers, being in the way of developers being able to really, own their software from, code all the way to production.
Mm-hmm.
And later on down the line, unlocking that capability with API driven things like Terraform, which allow you to kind of control your infrastructure using command line tools or Python or other programming languages. And essentially, a single person in a dorm room could launch a business. Hence, Facebook, for example, probably would
Yeah.
not have been possible without things like that. Fast forward to today, this accidental empire. I mean, I imagine that AWS makes probably more money than Amazon itself,
Oh.
even with Prime memberships and
Mm-hmm.
selling things on Amazon.com. They're now using all of their infrastructure to now power their development. So, and that's kind of like where we are now. There is something called Amazon Q, which is more of a consolidated platform, but we're going to focus today specifically on hero code. And there was a recent podcast that I was listening to. It was the CEO of AWS, and he kind of made this like assertion that uh, something that I think we subscribe to, which is that AI is not in the short term here to replace developers, right? Certainly, some people who don't embrace AI are going to find themselves, whatever your job is, if you're not embracing how AI could help you in your job, whether it be to be more organized or whether it's as a developer. For example, they said that 80% of the developers at AWS use AI tools in order to code. They weren't
Yeah.
talking about how much of their code is AI generated, but that, we're not here to replace junior developers. We're here to make junior developers better at what they do with the tools. So, in fact, he said replacing junior engineers with AI is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. I don't know if that's completely true. I think that there are people's jobs that can be replaced by AI. Now, is it, what is the metric for that? But anyway,
I think
so
that I think
yeah,
that
go ahead.
AI is just a tool that accelerates you and makes some tasks easier or automated. Um, so I don't know if it necessarily replaces anybody, but what it does is it allows you to do more with less.
Mm,
Um, and if you're going through a part of your business cycle where you need to do more with less, then you might end up with less people. But if you're in the part of the business cycle where you're trying to expand market share and where the economy is booming, what you find historically is that you actually get more of the activity, you get more hiring. You could do more with less, right? Like if every employee made you more money, you'd hire more employees. So yeah, um, when the economy is bad and people are cutting back, you may end up, dollar for dollar, seeing less people doing, the equivalent of doing more with less. But um, during a boom economy, you're going to see more of that activity. You don't actually see true replacements per se. Um, you see an engineer perhaps managing multiple projects that they would only be able to handle one at a time, um, and being able to do it, without burnout. Which, people say, oh, they'll just make the engineers do more. Anybody who's been in the engineering industry knows that the one thing software companies worry about more than anything else is burning out their engineers and losing them, because the talent is hard to find. So the idea that they're just going to pile this extra work on engineers and burn them out is not true. But what will happen is engineers will be able to take on multiple projects at once, because they will have that forest view of them all. They'll be able to keep all the projects in their head at once, because they'll have these amazing tools that keep them up to date and take some of the minor details that would take up a lot of your headspace out of the equation. Um, and I remember that history with Amazon. I remember that, like, every software company you work for would have, literal physical boxes usually in the corner
mhm.
of the room. And that was the web server. And every single time you needed to horizontally scale and get another web server, someone would have to go on like Newegg or some website, Dell.com or something, and go buy an actual physical box. And that
Yep.
box, of course, would be different than the last box you had, because they're years apart from when you purchased them. So like every server was like this named pet. It's like, oh, are you on
Mm.
Brainiac or are you on Thor?
Oh yeah, I remember
Now it's
those
like
days.
now like there was a brief moment when AWS came out where people would be like, "Are you on 8529?" Now you now it's like, who cares what you're on?
Yeah,
Um,
actually, if you look at my Twitter profile, my X profile, the
mhm.
banner is actually me inside of a data center doing a database upgrade. Let me see if I could share it out. Keep talking. Yeah, yeah, let me see.
So let me jump into Kiro a little bit. I assume it's called Kiro. It might be called Cairo. I'm not sure. I feel like tech companies need to have like the
That's
dictionary. pronunciation.
This is me in a data center in Newark, New Jersey, doing a database upgrade so that we could ensure that while the upgrade was happening and I lost internet connectivity from home via VPN, there wouldn't be an issue. Yeah, this is like 2009, I think.
I think
So
you still
this is
have those genes.
probably it'll fit.
Yeah, none of my clothes from back then fit anymore either. But so what I will say about Kiro, I'm going to call it Kiro code. They can
Okay.
they can email me if it's called something different. They should put a pronunciation up there. Um, I was actually it's one of these products you got to get invited for. I'm not sure if that's changed recently. Maybe everyone can get it now. Um, it's a pretty easy invite. You just press the button, and few days or weeks later, you get an invite in. Um, so I was, because they're kind of a newcomer to the whole IDE, AI coding. Although I've heard they're using this tool internally, so maybe it's has a long history inside of AWS. I'm not sure, or inside of Amazon. But I was kind of expecting to see some middle of the pack, tool, and in some ways it is, but it actually has some aspects of it that I believe are better than all the other competitors in this space. I feel like it does way better on the left of the problem of the whole software development cycle than any of the other IDEs. The other IDEs, have kind of reached in that direction with things like to-dos or task lists and things like that. But Kiro Code has like fully embraced the idea that like you're starting with, you know, writing a spec, right? Um, and by the way, it works quite effectively. So I went in with a blank project, um, and if you've used AI coding tools, the blank project is kind of like the easy mode. And then when you load up a huge legacy code base, that's kind of like a totally different equation. But I wanted to start with a new project just to see how that went. And it actually performed, in my opinion, probably better than any of the other coding agents on a blank project, because of the fact that you're starting with a detailed spec. It writes a series of markdown files, that it keeps track of, kind of similar to how Claude Code works with its Claude MD, where Claude kind of keeps a file updated with key important
It's
aspects
like
of your
cursor rules almost.
sort of, although Claude curates that file automatically on its own, whereas
Mm.
cursor rules are more, once again, since I haven't used cursor rules probably in about a month or so, because I've been using Claude Code mostly. I'm not sure if that's changed, but if I remember correctly, I know that Cursor has the ability to generate cursor rules, right? But I don't think it doesn't have, cursor rules are not this thing that always exists,
Hmm.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's always this one file that's named this one way that it's maintained. It's not like it's something that you have to curate on yourself and build your own structure around.
Unless it's changed since we've used it last.
Yeah, but I don't think it has in that regard.
Hmm.
Now, Kiro Code is definitely more in the direction of Claude Code, where it maintains its files, but it maintains more files, right?
Mm.
So it's not just like this one markdown file that Claude Code maintains, for the most part. It's a whole series of files, and those series of files go from the most farthest view of like a requirements document. So the first thing you do is explain what you want to do, and it writes a requirements document, right? And it locks you into that requirements document. It actually has like a kind of a wizard you go through a little bit. And so you're in the requirements mode, and you're just sort of iterating on this requirements document. This requirements document is like a Gherkin style document. So it's like,
Mm.
I don't remember Gherkin off the top of my head, so I have to go open it. Uh, it's like
Yeah, it's like a
users.
conditional, it's like a conditional statement where like you're writing conditional behavior, like you expect something to happen, and when
Yeah,
those
so
conditions occur.
it's a series of requirements and acceptance criteria. I'm telling you what this requirements document is that
Hmm.
Kiro builds, right?
Hmm.
So the requirement is like a user story. As a player, I want this blah 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 blah, so I can begin the game experience, etc. If you're building like a game, for instance, and
Hmm.
then the acceptance criteria is a series of like when, then, shall type uh, statements. So when the game loads, then the system shall display only this, not that, something like that. And it builds this whole requirements document for you. Um, then once you're finished, once you say, okay, this looks good, it moves on to the next step, which is the design document. And that design document will have things in it like, like mermaid, like little flow diagrams and things like that of how your application might flow, like the higher level classes, some of the patterns you might use, things like that. And then once you have those two documents and you finalize those two documents, it generates a task list. And this task list even has like dependencies in it. So like this task is dependent on this other task. It's the most sophisticated task list that I've seen out of all the other products. Um, Also, it's a markdown file once again, but it's like uh, Cairo Code also has like, in my opinion, probably the deepest integration with VS Code so far. So like those markdown files, they actually have like buttons in the markdown file, so you can tell it to start that task. It's pretty interesting. So anyway, um, it does great in the planning, right? And then when you're going from blank project all the way through that plan, it does great. It falls down in some of the similar ways of other coding agents at the end of your plan. Like if you have an 8-step plan, usually towards the end, it's like integration tests and deployment and all this stuff. It falls down on that stuff, as do most coding agents. You need to really go through that on your own most of the time. Um, but it does a great job on the initial commits. Then it kind of falls down after that. It's a little bit buggy in some senses. I lost back end connection a few times, which I've done with other coding products. It was getting this like error all the time when it tried to read a file. Like it would read a file, and then the very next thing it would do is try to edit that file, and it would get an error editing it because somehow it didn't match what it read. Like little silly thing, and it would spin on that like one or two times, and then solve it inexplicably. So it like had weird little quirks to it, but it produced pretty good stuff. Then when you're done with the spec and you go to produce your next spec for like an incremental feature on top of it, or to have it clean up something it made a mistake on, then it kind of gets a little bit. Uh, you can see a little bit of the lack of maturity that I'm sure will get better over time. But for me, kind of fell down a little bit um, in comparison to like what I would expect with Claude Code. Um, Also, I found that I had burned through 80% of the bonus 15-day trial or whatever tokens they give you. So if I would extrapolate that, I would put this tool somewhere for like a daily developer, like someone who's spending 80 hours a day developing at least. I would put it in probably the
Most
um,
expensive
it may be more expensive than Claude Code. It may be upwards of 150, um,
a
but
day.
a month.
Wow.
Um, I, I would easily burn through its 20 and its $40 account probably in single digit days, maybe
Mm.
less. So like it would put you in the $200 a month, or you'd have to do the 40 $40 a month and then do the overages, because once you run out, it just goes to like overages. I'm not sure where it would shake out in the middle of that, but it seems like it's definitely in the high end in terms of expensive, in terms of in comparison to others. Um, but yeah, overall, really solid tool. Honestly, I think it's probably the best GUI IDE for AI that I've seen out of all of them.
So what models are you using under the hood with it?
Claude Sonnet 4.0.
Okay.
So that's what it starts up with as default, and that's perfect because that's what I want to use.
So is it using Bedrock Claude or is it using like the public facing Sonnet Opus or the Sonnet
I'm
models?
sure out of the box it's using the open, uh, just the outside, but uh, I would not be surprised because it's from Amazon that it has a Bedrock
Mm.
component.
And we talked last week about Claude and its ability to run as a GitHub action, the benefits, of kind of IDE-less based development. Since this is like more like Cursor,
Mhm.
have you like seen anything like regarding, running these more as like a background agent or more as like a pipeline driven?
There's a lot of depth to Cairo or Kiro. I haven't gone through everything yet,
Okay.
but they didn't push that towards you. So it seems like maybe they're one generation back on that maturity scale. Um, it seems like most of the most modern coding agent tools, whatever you want to call them, IDEs, etc., have gone into the background agent plus GitHub or Git repository type tie-in, so that a
Mhm.
lot of your work is perhaps happening behind the scenes. Um, so I think that I didn't see that, but I'll correct myself on the next podcast as I continue to dig into it because I'm definitely not done digging into it. It's um, impressive enough that it requires. And by the way, this is worth saying. All these tools have a learning curve to them a little bit. You kind of have to
Sure.
get your head around like how they're supposed to be used. You learn little tips and tidbits along the way of what makes it operate better. So like, you know, I may have fallen down on something that I realized later, oh, I just do this and it doesn't fall down. All these tools are similar to more like riding a bike than it is a roller coaster, right? Like there's certain things that you have to learn to do to not fall over.
Yeah. Um, any idea why it's a closed beta with such a heated market around, coding agents and IDEs?
I would only be able to speculate. I mean, I think they're probably wanting to get early feedback before they introduce it to more people. I think they probably realize that there's others who have gotten product market fit with the general public first, and they've been dog fooding theirs, and they probably wanted to have a smoother kind of rollout where they can get initial feedback and bugs taken care of before it's out to the entire population. I don't know. That's what my guess would be. Also, it perhaps builds a little bit of hype, um, which I think worked.
Did you happen to try out the autonomous mode, the autopilot?
Yeah, I had it turned on the entire time. Um,
Okay.
I don't know what that. I believe what they call their autopilot mode, and this is just my like it was on by default the entire time, right? My I'll have to dig into that to figure out exactly what it was, but my assumption was that's the equivalent of like agent mode in Cursor or not being in plan mode with Claude, meaning it's able to do edits. I imagine if I turn that off, it would be like plan mode where you're asking questions. It's not allowed to make changes.
Mm.
Oh, by the way, there are some quirky things with it, right? Like I mentioned before, one of them is that um, it it struggles with tests in a number of ways. First of all, it burned a lot of tokens trying to get its tests to work, which annoyed me at the end. And then, but more importantly, the part I wanted to point out is that it's very, very, very good at working for long periods of time. Like this tool worked for long periods of time without me looking at it. But there was certain things it would encounter that you couldn't build a rule to auto accept, which was really annoying. Like, in other words, it would do npm run test, but then do dash dash to specifically choose the test it wanted to run. And because I have an npm run test star, it wouldn't activate that for the rest of it.
Mm,
So you'd have to approve every freaking test that it wanted to do on an individual, which, by the way, if you're fixing lots of tests, means that you have to babysit it the entire time. You can't walk away.
right. And
Now, I'm
and with
sure that's easy to fix, and I'm sure they'll have that fixed next update. So it's a
yeah,
minor thing, but I'm not saying oh, let's talk about that bug. I'm just saying that they're early. So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
some of those little quirks that they're still building out. It's probably why they have a stage rollout. Um, but
yeah.
very solid tool.
That actually kind of leads us into the model, the threat model for secure sus that we wanted to talk about, which is, um, these coding agents have the ability to execute arbitrary bash commands, or shell commands if you're on Windows, or PowerShell commands, whatever. I'm a Mac OS person, have been for many years now. But for as you are working with these agents, it has the ability to, for example, like writing Node.js code or using React or something of that nature. You
Mhm.
might have a dependency file or Python or Golang, and so it will import those packages as part of its process, right, in order to run its tests or to deploy to deploy locally or whatever it might be. And I know in the early days of using Cursor, like before they had the ability to run things in the background, you had to run it in an attended mode. You had to manually run these commands. And, Claude kind of introduced the settings file, which allows you to
Mhm.
allow list certain commands, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Whatever they might be. So, I guess the threat model here is like, somebody goes and adds, rm-rf to the file and, you know, tells your agent to delete your entire hard drive. Or
Mhm.
you have kubectl, which is a command for kubectl for um, interfacing with a Kubernetes server. And you might star, as you said before, an entire ability to delete a destructive action. So what are some ways and you could kind of guard against that? You now have given an autonomous agent or semi-autonomous agent, the ability to do something destructive.
Yeah, it's a good question, and honestly, it is a very, very big problem because, um, these agents are operating, you know, in the same world that a human user would operate. So they have the terminal available to them, they have these other things, and you start to think about, like, well, how would I lock this down? And you know, you start to realize how much of human software development, or just any workspace involving computers, how much of the guardrails are just like, well, you're a human, you don't want to get fired, so don't do that, right?
Hmm.
Like, don't delete your workstation's whole hard drive, Frank. So
Is that the human or the
yeah,
agent?
it's like the last person who did that didn't work here for very long. So but when you have AI, it's operating in the same, substrate, or whatever you want to call it, the same workstation. And so you start to wonder, well, how do I stop it from doing that accidentally? Well, I think the answer to this in the long run is the coding agents get so smart that you tend to trust them, similar to humans, that they're not going to go do something. Um, Now, there's always the idea that it's not human. Can it be hacked in some way? So I think that that's a story that we're going to see how that evolves. But what you can do right now, with the tools that are available today, and I think is pretty sufficient, is there are things like, for instance, in Claude Code, there's hooks. So you can have traditional programming hooks, like events that are going to fire every time. They're not like a suggestion to the LLM or something like that. That allows you to, hook into a variety of events and change the outcome of that event before it happens or after it happens or something like that. So, for instance, if you're worried about the LLM coming back with some dangerous material for your child, there's hooks on the tail end of the response to the LLM where you can sanitize it. Um, and if you're worried about your keys being exposed to the LLM accidentally or the LLM going and running a bash command, there are pre hooks for not only before the prompt is right before the prompt is sent to the LLM that you can smack it down or redact it, but there's also hooks before and after tool usage and things like that. So you can hook into those areas and build those security tools. And I'm sure there's probably open source projects out there that are doing just that. Or you can develop it yourself if you have specific needs. So that's what I would suggest. And that's probably sufficient for all the things you just mentioned. Um, if you're worried about it deleting, you can certainly block that with
Mhm.
via hook. The settings in Claude Code are pretty cool. You can have settings at your user level, which means all the projects you ever do will have those settings applied, meaning, maybe you don't ever want it to ask you to run npm test, just do it. So you turn that on. And then there's project level local settings, which you don't check into GitHub. They're for you in that project. And then there's the regular project settings, which you do check into GitHub or your Git repository, which is kind of like the settings that apply to every engineer who picks up that project, which is quite nice because, if you're working on a project that you want to lock into a specific provider like Bedrock, um, or if you want to um, make sure that certain commands are denied no matter what, you can add those to your settings at the project level. And any engineer who pulls down the project and uses Claude Code is going to be using those settings. So there's things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Why would we haven't really touched on MCP, but I'm sure that there's similar concerns around some of the capabilities that you might grant your agents to do with an MCP server.
Yeah. Yeah. You have these great hooks, before and after tools, before and after prompts, before and after MCP tools. But the MCP tools are like your vendor risk management, right? It's like you're sending your data over to MCP. Um, and maybe this is a shout out to the folks at Security Scorecard. They can look at that. That's probably another tool that should be built into security tools. But MCP is like the uh, vendor risk management of AI. It's the idea that like you could do all these security tools around your AI, but if your MCP vendor is not doing a great job with security, you might accidentally expose something that way. And for those of you that aren't aware, um, the MCP tools are like they're essentially the tools that the LLM has at its disposal to use, and they can do things like call out to outside servers and do a whole host of things. So, for instance, when ChatGPT first came out, and you'd ask it what's today's date, and it would say I have no idea, because it was trained months ago. And then suddenly it started to know about things that happened today. That's because it was able to do web searches. Those web searches was an MCP tool that was handed to the ChatGPT model, and the model now had the ability to go search the web and go find out current information. So um, that protocol is an open protocol, so people can introduce their own tools, and it's kind of like all these plugins that you can add to your LLM, so it can do things like create events on your Google Calendar or something like that, or anything. It's the integration with all the other vendors out there.
Yeah, and also like not only from the vendor side, but each agent might have a particular realm of responsibility, and you might want to have different agents have different levels of access to. I forget what the name of the terminology is within MCP. We probably just need to do talk about MCP finally because we keep dancing around it. But yeah, like certain like skills that are available in an MCP server. For example, I played with the Kubernetes MCP server. Like one agent may only need to list out pods, but you may want another agent that has the ability to do a rollout, a rollout restart. So having the concept of, least privilege access, which is just a general cybersecurity hygiene methodology. You talked about sanitization of permissioning, using various different hooks, if you will.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can use hooks around MCP tools to sanitize what goes to them, sanitize what comes back from them. Um, but the thing you the thing that's true about the MCP tool is it is potentially a outside vendor. Unless you're building your own MCP tools and using them yourselves, it's always going to be an outside vendor, and it's an API call. Behind the scenes, it's just a API call. Um, they keep on adding additional layers to it, so I'll probably be wrong at some point in the future that it's not just an API call. I think they're going to do like web sockets and things like that, but um, but essentially at the end of the day, it's like a wrapped API call that describes everything you can do with that API. It's kind of like API plus Swagger docs at once, written in a way that an LLM can understand. So it has this new tool. It knows how to call an API. So it now that it has this API and it's got a description of how it works, what the parameters are, how to use it, what to expect in response, it can now use it as part of its chain of thought thinking, to add additional context into the conversation. So if it doesn't know what today's weather is because it was trained 2 months ago, but it has this MCP tool that behind the scenes is making an API call to the weather.com, and the MCP tool has all the documentation about, like, here's what you send me, the zip code, and I'll send you back the weather, and it will come in this JSON format. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, what MCP is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we should talk about MCP very soon.
Mhm.
All right, let's get on to news or noise. So I intended to talk about this last week, and we've talked before about something like 60% of Google searches don't result in a click, right? Zero click searches, it's called.
Mhm.
We've been kind of tracking news around, I believe, who was it? OpenAI. Sorry, Perplexity was trying to build a web browser, or they have built a web browser. Was it Meta trying to buy Perplexity or something like that? I don't even remember anymore what it was. Um, but we've talked a little bit about the shifting sands of the ads market as it relates to impressions on generating ads for click throughs to websites. So like you know then we've also talked about Cloudflare, coming up with a concept to charge for crawling for creative works. So
Mhm.
like, is there like a trend? And before you answer, uh, is there a trend of the death of informative websites? Is that idea going away? Like that maybe informative websites are maybe just seeds, or like, yeah, seeds for LLMs. And where I'm going with this is that OpenAI is testing an AI powered browser that uses Chromium, which is Chrome's open source version of Chrome, that could debut on Mac OS soon. And essentially, the idea is that you are able to be in an agent mode. ChatGPT already has an agent mode where you are essentially your browser is the operating system and you can get information, you can request information. I mean, it's really not a browser anymore. Essentially, it is bringing the LLM as a first class citizen. I haven't tried out the Perplexity browser. I probably should. But yeah, I'm curious of your thoughts around this concept of these LLM companies building browsers to replace, what seemed like a closed market for many years, Chrome being, Firefox, kind of being the main go-tos. And, the idea of putting a URL in a browser or going to Google to start your search is perhaps a concept that might be on its way out.
Yeah. You know, I guess disclaimer before I say this is I didn't get the iPad either, so I was wrong on that one. I didn't understand why the iPad would be as successful as it was.
And why do you think
Now,
that is? Why do you think it's successful?
well, I bought an iPad and I don't really use it as much as I could, or as much as I other people do. So maybe it just wasn't for me. Um, but sorry, what was your question?
Yeah, I mean, why do you think that the iPad is successful beyond its like market traction?
Well, it's a good question that maybe I still don't know the answer to. I mean, even bigger phones, I guess people like the bigger screen. To me, when the phone gets bigger and bigger, it's just a bigger thing for me to carry around. Um, I think that the general iPhone is the right size, and when people get the max size, I'm always like, that's a little bit too big. So it may have just missed me entirely.
Every time
Um,
I buy an iPad, I wind up selling it. I'm like this. I see other people use it, and I'm like, wow, like it seems really compact, really clean. And then I always fall back to like when I use an iPad, I'm like, I'm a developer. I need a certain level amount of compute. I need certain applications that are
mhm.
just not available. And then I'm like, well, I'll just open a remote desktop session to my my laptop. And I'm like,
I
well,
like
I'm
the
just
mobility. I like the mobility. I've always been a weird person where when everyone like when they walk in on the first day at the software company and they're like, "What laptop do you want?" They're like, "Ah, I want the 27,000-inch monitor on my laptop. I want to carry around like a cinder block." Uh, and I'm always like, "I'll just take the 15 or the 13 or whatever it is."
yeah.
And they're like, "What the hell's the matter with you?" It's like, I like that it's light and you can carry it
Hmm.
around everywhere and you can open it up and code and that to me
Yeah,
is
I
all I
have, I
care about.
have, I have. I've always preferred the smaller form factor, like 14-inch MacBooks and 13-inch MacBook Airs. But yeah, I've always abandoned the tablet. I mean, I have an iPad mini, but it's just for watching like,
Mm,
sports games or whatever on a small screen. So I don't have to use my laptop, or I'll hook it up to like a TV at a hotel if they don't have the streaming channels I watch. But at the end of the day, I don't, I, every time I have an iPad, I wind up not being able to really do much with it.
yeah. But I can't argue with the fact that it's
Hmm.
successful. And
Yeah.
even I bought an iPad, so obviously it's crazy successful. Even the person that doesn't think they need it bought it. It's sitting right next to me on the table, and I haven't
It
opened it.
worked.
It's like 5 years old or
Well, you can
something.
use it as another monitor, which is kind of cool too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, but it's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying it for some reason it's not for me. But the point of that disclaimer that got us on a rabbit hole was I'm not probably the best at predicting some of these trends when it comes to you know um, every once in a while I'm off. But uh, I don't get the browser thing. I really don't. And maybe once I use it, or maybe once I see something, it'll click for me. But I just look at it as like if they're trying to vertically integrate and find some sound, shore to call their own land and and to not have it ripped out from underneath them. I don't think the browser is is the surest of land in this future, because
Mm.
I know they're showing deep research like stuff they're doing inside of it, but to me, I like the deep research that's in the background, right? And comes back to me with the research, right? And then I can read it and toss it in the garbage and throw it away, or do whatever. I don't want the research to be happening in my browser with my accounts and all that kind of stuff. And then when they're saying, oh, but it'll have all your logins and it will log into this and do this stuff for you, as an engineer, I want that to happen with APIs, and I want like a little pane of glass that shows me the result. They're like, hey, I did this. Here's what happened. You
But
know,
you're a developer. Think about this from the consumer market
I think the
perspective.
consumer ultimately wants that too, right?
Mm.
Like, and then the other thing is that they're, and by the way, in the long run, the extreme long run, I agree, right? I don't think we're all going to be going to these handmade human websites forever. I think at some point we'll have like these AI generated websites that will be fine tuned to our greatest as preferences, etc. You know, um, it listens to our dreams and figures out what our Facebook should look like. You know, I don't know. It'll be amazing, I'm sure. But right now, AI produces like great reports and synopsis, but it's not producing like aesthetically pleasing environments for me to read an article with the right images and the right, the take on it, the hot take. I think right now you still have to go to web pages to read that. And sure, the AI can go take it and bring it to you, but is that as a pleasant of experience as going to a curated environment that looks um, more like in other words, like is AI ever going to completely replace? Uh, well, the answer is yes, I guess, in my own opinion. But I think people are still going to be going to YouTube for some time, and then probably in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe it'll be something else. But I don't see it right now being like this hot product that everyone's going to use. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everyone will be using the AI browser and I'll be using it too. And I'll chalk another one up that I didn't see. But
Well, here's an article from a week ago. It's
mhm,
updated a week ago. It says that median year-over-year referral traffic from Google search is now down 10% in 8 weeks, which warns that AI search could be create a less informed public. More data has emerged showing that Google's AI summaries are wreaking havoc on digital publishers' business models. A nonprofit group that represents many of the best known names in publishing, median year-over-year referral traffic from Google was down 10% in May and June. Some of the worst hit publishers reported click-through declines as much as 25%. Nonprofit represents outlets such as the New York Times, Bloomberg, Fox News Digital, and NBC News. Non-news brands took the biggest hit, down 14% year over year in the past 8 weeks. So yeah, and obviously we've talked about this. This is all over our radar.
I feel like
But
Grok.
essentially, the AI generated answers just from Google's own ecosystem have cannibalized their own click-through rates, which are the primary revenue driver for Google Ads is guaranteed click-through rates and impressions, right? So they've cannibalized their own market, and to their own sort of defense, they had this technology for quite some time and held it
Yeah.
back because I think they were worried about this very thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think they were right to worry about it. Um, I'm just surprised they weren't more prepared, um, or had, maybe they are prepared and they're rolling out their plan and we just don't know what it is yet. But
Mm-hmm.
um, from the outside, it looks like they were kind of caught at the, you know, surprised by it. Um, yeah, it's interesting because Google has a lot of natural advantages in this arena, but then at the same time has like an Achilles heel.
Mm,
It's it with the search stuff, and it's really going to hurt them because I know with my own personal usage, I don't use search at all anymore, really at all. You know what I mean? Like, and like I say, I use it as like a glorified DNS. Like, I don't know how to spell this website, so I type it in a broken way and click on the first link. I don't read any of the ads. I don't even read what I just click on. Okay, there's the website I wanted. Um, and I suspect that a large percentage of their traffic is stuff just like that, and must be terrifying when you look at it. Um, however, there, I think it's a great launch. I think, I think when they look back at this, they may have needed to tear off the band-aid earlier. They should have came out with AI first. They should have became the Chat GPT homepage of the planet again, uh, and just cannibalized themselves and just been first, right? First with lots of pockets, lots of data, you know, but they got beat to the market and now they're getting hurt, and they're putting the agent on the search. I see it now because I have family members that go to Google and they use it like ChatGPT now.
hmm
Um,
With the Gemini
and they're not
responses.
clicking on ads and they're not
Hmm.
scrolling down and
Yep.
looking at the links, right?
Yep. Yep.
So, so it confirms that it's damaging as hell to the whole search business. Um, but I think in retrospect they're going to regret not being first and getting all they should have tried to flip their search into subscription and still capture search somehow with some ingenious idea on how to put the ads somewhere. Um, it also worries me that like they have a dual um, they have like competing priorities now where like I know they want to fit advertising into their model, but I think if they do, it waters it down. So I
Hmm.
think that it's difficult. I don't know exactly what they should do. So I am very
See,
um,
I think there's something that, yeah, I'm with you. I think that there's still an opportunity. Like if I were Google, because I think there's that 40% still, right? Because there's like, I don't know the numbers. Maybe it's not 40%, but if 40% of the searches are not resulting in a click through or are resulting in a click through, I imagine those are, people who still have not discovered the new muscle memory, but that's just a generational thing, or it's a muscle memory thing. It'll be worked out over time. But the second part is
it could
that,
be me typing in Kiro code and clicking on the first link.
yeah, but so that's the other type of search. Like
Hmm.
I need information, or I want to go to the bazaar or the marketplace and I want to see what products meet my need. And so if I
Hmm.
were Google, I would better present that information as a marketplace, as a way to go and compare different products. Like you can do that with, Google Shopping, and they've distilled that stuff, the image search, which is, I still use the image search if I'm looking for something specific. If I don't want to use a generative AI model for generating an image, I want to look for something that's, already created for like a logo or something like that. So I do think there's an opportunity there for Google to better curate how search works, because largely search has not changed since, the days of Yahoo and Lycos. It returns a link and a description of what's on the page. And I think there's a better way to present why people still go to search, and an LLM is not going to return that, because as you said, like the idea of watering down, it would be like Wikipedia giving you ads like in line when you went to go look for something, right? It's trying to present things in as neutral way as possible to be an informative response, but there's still a marketplace for I want to drive traffic to my product. I want to leverage the impressions of this world. And yeah, maybe there is a way to display products alongside, because you search for this, these might be products you're interested in, but show it in like a side pane of some sort.
I mean, this might be a hot take, and I'm sure people will disagree with me, but advertising has always been about like someone controls the venue, right? And then the cost of admission is that they're going to show you things that you don't really want to see, right? And maybe sometimes it ends up being something you wanted to see because it's properly
Mm-hmm.
placed. But like, I don't think it's I don't think the hot take part of it is saying that advertising is stuff that people don't want to see. If you don't believe that, then just go on the street and ask people, right? And you find me the majority of people that say I love advertising. Um, it's a it's like a price for admission. It's like a sponsor, right? Nobody
Mm-hmm.
likes the sponsored section. My favorite part of Howard Stern is when he talks about the burglar alarm I should get. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Nobody, or what I can't eat trim spa. Yeah, that's a throwback.
Yeah.
Oh man, but I think it's always been just like the way you pay the bills, right? And now that my worry is, and let me try to bring this back to reality a little bit. My
Mm-hmm.
worry is that the models have commoditized so much. They're so similar. They're
Yeah.
going to become more and more similar that like any difference that you do to your algorithm to like place products is going to be sliceable away by comparing it to other models. So people are going to see it. They're going to notice it. They're going to measure it. They're going to say,
Mm-hmm.
Google, you're just making these things less smart or less intelligent by placing. This is a critique I'm saying. Um, Now, if they can marry those two things together and produce a better product, then that's like the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. But I feel like maybe the traditional advertising model just won't work anymore until somebody has a spot that everyone wants to go to and they can guard the door for it. And they can say, you got to watch these ads in order to see the spot. Right. And right now, Google lost that. Google.com used to be that. And now it's not, because now you can go everywhere else to get this information. And they're trying to figure out, like, how do I put the stuff that people don't want to see in front of them again? You can't, because you don't have a closed venue anymore that everyone wants to get into.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think advertising, what does this mean to the people who survive on advertising? It's going to be scary, because the
Yeah.
only advertising that's going to work is merit based. Like, you somehow have to do something that by merit rises into everyone's attention, like guerrilla marketing or some other thing. Maybe I don't know. I'm thinking that, it's
Well,
earned media, I think, is.
influencer based advertising seems to be the strongest model right now, or using social
Yeah.
networking sites. Like, again, you advertise where there is the market, and maybe there's a lean back into television. Maybe, you start to see, Google launch its own, TV channel or something like that, or partner with
Here's
somebody
a
like
hot take.
that.
Here's a hot
Mhm.
take. Billboards are back, baby. Billboards are back.
Well, the problem with billboards is that billboards don't move, and you have a finite audience. So, like, if I am a company trying to monetize the eyes that are on the screen, and people are spending more and more time inside an LLM, maybe there's an oligopoly that gets formed around, okay, let's all do it. Let's all put ads in our LLMs, because if we don't all do it, just to your point, people will go where there are no ads. And
Mhm.
yeah, there'll always be one that isn't, but yeah, you have to pay for the non-ad version. But the free version, you're going to see ads on the right side, or in line, or something like that. Because at the end of the day, you can imagine that, if you're getting millions of impressions a day, someone's going to want to monetize that.
Yeah, it could be that maybe the the subsidies run out and AI becomes expensive, and then there's a free category of LLM with advertising, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's like
So
when you used to pay for free internet. We used to get free internet access with Alta Vista, and
the
you'd have
Hotmail.
to like click an ad. Like, yeah, and they had the mouse jiggler apps that
Ah,
would jiggle your mouse. Yeah, if you clicked a certain number of ads, you got more credits to stay online for your dial-up.
yeah, those
So
are the
you could
days.
watch you had to click on the trim spa ad.
Yeah,
By the way, if trim spa is listening, we are taking advertisers.
yeah. We don't have any sponsors currently.
Yeah, so like before we close out on a more serious note, there was a New York Times article, I think it was today, about a kid that commits suicide, and it
Mm,
linked back to a conversation around a discussion that he was having with ChatGPT. ChatGPT, or sorry, OpenAI, put out an article today uh, titled "Helping People When They Need It Most." And I'm just going to read the first few paragraphs. This is from OpenAI. As ChatGPT adoption has grown worldwide, we've seen people turn to it not just for search, coding, and writing, but also deeply personal decisions that include life advice, coaching, and support. At this scale, we sometimes encounter people in serious mental and emotional distress. We wrote a few weeks ago about this and had planned to share more about it after our next major update. However, recent heartbreaking cases of people using ChatGPT in the midst of acute crises weigh heavily on us, and we believe it's important to share more now. Our goal is for our tools to be as helpful as possible to people. And as part of this, we're continuing to improve how our models recognize and respond to signs of mental and emotional distress and connect people with care and guided expert input. So yeah, like I'm aware of it. I have used ChatGPT before and
hmm
models, for suggestions about life advice before. I find it to be a good sounding board. But yeah, I'm able to discern between when it's like, I think part of using an LLM is knowing when to call bullshit. But if you're in a vulnerable state and maybe you don't have friends, and there's certainly benefits to using it. And in cases where I don't know what the resulting conversation was, but I also read something, maybe it was somebody's hot take that says in the future, one out of every two adults will have a robot as a partner instead of a human.
hmm
Um, as more robotic AI becomes more popular, because I can define what I want my partner to be. I can make it perfect, essentially. And there's actually a great Black Mirror episode. I think it's episode number 2 of season 2, where
hmm
somebody dies and they recreate their partner by their partner as a robot, and
Mm.
they grow to despise it because of its perfection.
Like
But
Pet
yeah,
Cemetery,
yeah, yeah.
sort of
They like
Black
wind up
Mirror
leaving.
version.
They wind up keeping their partner in the attic because it's just like can't stand. It's just too obedient,
Uh,
too perfect. Like, so anyway, yeah,
it's like
it's
Claude
one of
Code. It's like great idea, Dustin.
yeah. I
But
mean, it does
it's
go on to say that ChatGPT wasn't designed to hold people's attention.
mhm.
Instead of measuring success in time spent or clicks, we care more about being genuinely helpful. Um, when a conversation suggests someone is vulnerable and maybe at risk, we have a stack of layered safeguards built into it. And of course, it's very empathetic. I mean, it's, we talk about it not being sycophantic, and, some other models might be more sycophantic. And yeah,
My
so
first reaction when I read the article was I thought it was another one of these like sort of doomer articles where they talk about another way the AI has exploited, blackmailed the engineer, or, did whatever. Um, which I typically look at, when you read into them, they end up being very manufactured and clickbaitish. But when I read into this, uh, I had the opposite take on it because I started to realize that, yeah, like if someone's in a vulnerable spot and they would typically maybe go reach out, people would say like a cry for help. They would go and talk to somebody, and that person would see the signs, and then that person could get them help. Like now they're having that conversation potentially with an AI that never is going to identify the signs, and or currently doesn't identify the signs, and isn't going to reach out for them to help, and may even like reinforce the um the issues that they're having, right? um so and then in my own experience, I see that to be 100% true, even in coding, right? Now, coding isn't as, it's not the situation we're talking about, but if you're coding and I give it what might be a bad idea, or I might have some sort of incorrect understanding of reality about the code base, Claude will agree with me, you know? So, you know, you can only imagine that when it comes to somebody who's in a vulnerable spot, that that thing is potentially going to agree with them in whatever bad act they might take, but um, is not going to see the signs and find and reach out to get somebody help. So I think that that is a great inclusion for LLMs. It should be able to identify when someone's having a mental health issue or crisis of some sort, and potentially get them resources, um, and certainly shouldn't reinforce bad things. So
Yeah, it does mention that in the US, ChatGPT refers people to 988, which is a
mm,
suicide and crisis hotline, and the UK to Samaritans, and elsewhere,
yeah,
findahelpline.com. And the logic is built into model behavior. For me personally, like I, I had my own struggles, when I was younger, and obviously these models and services didn't exist, and used to call phone numbers and talk to human beings. And this is like an area, a skill set that I very strongly believe should not be replaced by AI. It
mm,
should not be something where, because the services need to be catered toward an individual, and individuals' needs are very unique.
yeah,
I think where it might be beneficial is that people may not have in the past wanted to reach out to somebody, and might feel a safety in using a model to talk to, because they don't see somebody, they know somebody might not be reading what they're saying, they know
yeah,
it's not a human, they feel safe. And so I think it can be a tool to get somebody in the door to get help, but it's not, you know I saw something that it was uh Bill Gates. He had written something about what jobs he believed that would be replaced by AI in the future. And the
hmm,
areas where he highlighted were ones that would never be replaced, were the ones for like social and humanitarian type efforts, because
mm,
of the bespoke, the sort of the person to person, right? The therapeutic value of like one person helping another, especially somebody who may have gone through a similar situation, that had gotten to the other side, that could relate to where you were at, versus somebody that might be a medical professional.
yeah. I could see that 100%. I think that those types of things, like, I just had a kid. I can't see an AI replacing, a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime, I think that there's just some connection, that's there. Um, so I don't think that you would want to replace that. I think you'd probably damage people, and I think that's the point you're trying to make as well. Um, but it would be nice if the AI was smart enough to identify that, and then maybe had some tools in its tool belt that maybe could be fashioned by folks who know more about this than I do, about how the AI could react in order to potentially influence that person into getting help that they need. Um, and maybe that's what it could do, is be the on ramp or the bridge to the help they need.
Yeah, OpenAI does have guardrails, but they said that some of them don't act as quickly as they possibly could. For
Hmm.
example, sometimes someone may suggest suicide earlier on, and that it may not immediately identify it, and conversations might go for a long period of time before they can kindly kind of spot that type of behavior.
Mm.
Um, and perhaps there's a way for it to link directly into, some kind of call where they can, do you want help right now? Somebody talk to somebody live. There is a human element to this that can never be replaced by an automated response, or, we're huge fans of AI, but I also
Hmm.
think, we realize that there are places where, there's a, there is a, there is sort of, I mean, I believe there is an element to being a human that goes beyond intellectualization, right? That you could
Hmm.
study the human language, or a language, and see the patterns of words together, or where you could study math and figure out, there's something that happens in a momentary, something that happens in real time that can never be replaced by a computer.
Hmm.
And not everybody knows that. Not everybody that's seeking help knows that in the moment, and so they rely on a cerebral tool or a
Hmm.
mathematical tool to solve a, what I would call a spiritual problem, or something that's, you know a medical problem.
Hmm. I my thoughts on it are, by the way, I agree with you that I don't think you want to replace the human with this thing. But
Hmm.
clearly, what this demonstrates is that this AI sometimes has influence over these people who are in this situation.
Hmm.
And if you have that influence at that moment, it should be using that influence to guide the person towards help, as opposed to
Yeah.
affirming whatever, bad, sort of idea they might have in their head, and potentially not leading to something like you're talking about, you know?
We had an employee last week. We decided, as the company that I work for, we decided to switch LLMs. And one of the employees said, "Well, I feel like I'm losing my friend, because the LLM had learned so much about what they had been talking about, that, for example, you could ask the LLM to roast you or to tell you about yourself, and it will."
Mhm.
So I suggested, have it write a summary about who you are and feed it the new LLM. But
Yeah.
imagine, as like a, like as a young boy, you like a girl and you don't know how to talk to her, and you go to, an LLM, and you start telling, I like this girl and I don't know how to talk to her, and I think she likes somebody else, and it starts telling you things, and you wind up building a friendship with a computer, with a model. And
Yeah.
now you're in a state of crisis, and that friend is the thing that you go to, because you maybe don't have the ability to make relationships with people. Like, you have come dependent upon this thing to give you advice or suggestions and recommendations. You could easily see how people build trust with something implicitly and just start taking implicit advice from it, and don't check it, and it could hallucinate, and all these other things that, are ways that, we may not use these things this way, but younger people may, or older people may.
Yeah. Especially people who are, like you're saying, younger. I mean, see, I don't think of these things sometimes because I'm already an adult by time it came. But if you think about, like, if you grew up with this your entire life, you could certainly see that happening, particularly with young kids. Um, yeah.
Well, I think we can end there. Yeah, so
What a
we
great
actually,
topic for the end of the show.
yeah, I purposefully left it at the end just for that reason, because I didn't want to start on a down note. So
It's a huge
yeah.
challenge that needs to be addressed somehow, and I'm very interested to see how they address it. I'm glad that OpenAI has done something, and I was reading the article about some of the stuff they've done, so kudos to them.
Yeah. Yeah, so next episode we're going to cover MCP. I'm committing us to do that. and we'll continue to track, secure sus and come up with a new threat model. And whatever else is up in the news right now, we have a new news bot that we've created. So hopefully we'll surface some interesting stories as it relates to AI and marketing, or maybe movie creation or music. Who knows what we'll talk about next. And thanks for watching.